Hello and welcome to Cyberspace on the Edge. So what we have here, as if this knife needs any introduction, is the Kizer Cyberblade. So part of Kizer's Bladesmith series, and the Bladesmith series where they collaborate with designers. But in this particular case, it is an in-house designer. So this knife has been designed by you. Not you, Y-U-E, not Y-O-U. And he is a senior designer and team leader at Kizer. And I seem to be a little bit late to the party on this. Probably a lot, or definitely a lot of reviews and a lot of information already out on this knife. But believe it or not, this was the first knife review that I ever shot on this knife. But it was so terrible that, I never actually published it. So if you think my reviews are bad now, just imagine what that must have been like for me not to even put it on to YouTube. And that was probably about 6 months ago. Right, so with that little bit of useless information, I'm going to be doing the usual materials, dimensions, and weight, and then dive into design and attributes of this very, very interesting knife. So this, the budget version of Kizer's lineup, and I'll explain and go through the other versions a little bit later. But as a budget version of the knife, it still has a very, very good blade steel. So we've got a blade steel of M390, the powdered steel, very good blade steel, like I say. We've got a handle of G10 and the thumb stud, very interesting shaped thumb stud, that is also G10. And then most of the rest of the hardware is all stainless steel. So we've got a stainless steel pocket clip, a stainless steel Torx screw, stainless steel pivot cap, stainless steel back spacer. And then inside there, we've got hidden embedded stainless steel liners. And then we've got a glass breaker that is tungsten. Right, so what else have I left off? The pivot assembly. So the blade runs on ceramic ball bearings. Right. So what's next? Dimensions and weight. Let's get cracking. Blade length, we've got 5.5 centimeters or 55 mils if you want, and that's 2.16 inches. Blade thickness of nice chunky blade, 3.5 millimeters. Let's get that back on screen, and that is 0.13 inches. Handle thickness is 12.5 millimeters, and that's 0.49 inches. Closed length of the knife, and that's including that glass breaker, is 88.5 millimeters, and that's 3.48 inches. And then overall length of the knife, and once again, that is with the glass breaker, it is 143.5 millimeters, and that's 5.65 inches. And then weight of the knife, and as per usual, I've got manufacturer's stated weights. So in this case, Kizer's stated weight, and I will check that against my scale. So let's get, is that nicely lined up? Let's get that cranked up. What are we on? We're on grams. Let's see what we get here. I get 85. What did they have? 87 grams. So a little bit lighter than what they get. And in ounces, I get 3 ounces. They got 3.1 ounces. Right, so close enough. And then just by the way, while I'm there, the other version of the knife that I'll speak about a bit later is a titanium, has a titanium frame lock version, and their stated weight for that 98 grams compared to the 87 grams for this version stated by Kizer. And then 3.5 ounces, they stated for the titanium version, and then the 3.1, as I mentioned, for this, according to their stated weights. Right, let's get that open and speak about the design of the knife. And again, I'm not going to be giving you any surprises here. Most of you will know this already, that the design of the knife was based on the Tesla Cybertruck, and you, the designer, is a Tesla driver. So he speaks about the fact that he based the design heavily on the design and shape of the Cybertruck, and you can see that in profile. It does sort of emulate that Cybertruck. I, by the way, think that shape works far better on a knife than a truck, but that is just my opinion. So blade shape, we've got a Tanto blade, modified Tanto, I would say, but you can see the Tanto in the two grinds and the edge of the knife, very clearly Tanto. And both those grinds, the primary grind and the tip grind, are flat. and then we can see this heavy drop to the blade of the knife. And when I get it in hand, you can see how some of these shapes actually make sense from a practical point of view. And then, do I even need to point it out? Massive thumb hole. Can one call that a thumb hole? But that takes up most of the ricasso, and then a little bit of the ricasso that comes down there, straight plunge line that runs into the smallest little sharpening choil. So with that sharpening choil, easy enough to keep that edge neat and tidy. And speaking of neat and tidy edges, very neat, uniform, and tidy edge out of the box, and it came very sharp out of the box as well. Right, what else do I need to speak about on the blade? So very square spine to that blade, and you can see where that tapers off to the tip, and that's obviously where the tip grind is. And then this strangely shaped thumb stud that I spoke about, and that actually creates a really nice platform for your thumb when you get this knife in hand. I'll show a little bit more of that just now. And then we've got a little bit of jimping on the back of the spine, and then you can see this inside jimping on the handle that, once again, I'll speak about that as well a little bit later. The finish on the blade, really good. So we've got a black stonewash in this particular instance, but that really very nicely done, has that sort of worn look about it, and all the edges all very, very neat and tidy, not really softened, so pretty square sharp edges around the spine and on the inside of that thumb hole. Markings on the blade, and this is quite playful. I thought this is a nice little design touch. So when the blade is closed, you can see the Kizer logo perfectly lining up with the handle at that spot of the blade. And when you flick it the other side, you've got the designer's mark, and I'm assuming that that is use designer's mark on the blade there. And then when you get the blade open, the name of this particular knife, Cyber Blade, and the blade steel M390 then perfectly line up with the handle when it's open. So when the blade's open, that is showing and nicely lining up, but you don't see any other marks on the blade. And then when you close it, you get to see the Kizer logo and you get to see the designer's mark. I just thought that was, like I say, a nice little interesting and playful touch. Little interesting shapes that are created as well. So that big thumb hole mostly gets hidden when the blade is closed, but then that creates another interesting shape, a different shape when it's closed with that hole there. But so many little interesting things going on, even though we have these straight angular lines and straight facets on the blade. It is an incredibly interesting design. The more you look at it, it's one of those, the more you actually see. Overall shape, we've spoken about the fact that it resembles the Cybertruck, but very, very practical and comfortable when you get it in hand. So everything kind of makes sense. So that overall line, the spine of the handle that runs onto the spine of the blade, and that angle that it creates, when you get that in hand, that creates a little bit of a ramp for your thumb. And I spoke about that thumb tab, that your thumb falls nicely onto there as well. And then you've got that little bit of jimping. And then that jimping I spoke about just now. So we've got jimping on the inside of the scale. So you can see that from the top, but from the side, that is hidden so that it doesn't actually mess with the lines, the clean lines of the knife. But they do actually work when you get your thumb in there. That jimping does grip your thumb. And then, like I say, you've got that little thumb ramp. And then using the knife, you can use it in that form, and that feels good in hand for heavy tasks. And then you can move your thumb onto that portion, the spine of the blade there, if you're really getting down onto it, and then move the knife into sort of that position into your hand if you're doing some of that fine work. And you can see how your forefinger neatly falls on the drop of the blade, and that really works very well as well. So it's kind of like a utility knife. It's one of those knives that just lends itself to good hard use, opening packages, box cutting, all sorts of tasks. It lends itself to that kind of use. It is a very good and very practical and small little EDC knife. Generally, the ergo's pretty good in your hand. There's, for me, a couple of little hot spots on the knife when you are using it, and sort of that hard use when you're really grabbing the knife. So first of all, let me just look at the size there. So I've mentioned the fact that in other reviews that I have medium hands and I wear a large glove. So you can see how my hands wrap around that. My little finger just gets onto that flat portion and starts sort of falling off the back. So bigger hands, your little finger is going to fall off the back of the handle, but I think still practical enough. But in my particular case, for my size hands, when I get onto the knife and I grip it, this little corner here where you've got the lock and that straight cut there, that does dig into my fingers. Extended hard use, I'm going to just grab it now and then open my hand, and you'll see where it's biting and digging into my finger there. So that's not the most comfortable thing. And then the other spot where there is a hot spot that it digs in is the glass breaker. So when you are using the knife and you're getting a good grip on it, I'll lift that and you can see how that digs into your palm. So two little hot spots on it, but all in all, for a small knife, I think a practical user, and it is, and I'm saying it again, it is a knife that lends itself to hard use. Right, rest of the design, the other little neat touches on it. So you can see that crease that runs through the handle. So you've got the straight facet on that side and the straight facet on that side with this crease running down, and that crease perfectly lines up with the bottom of that big thumb hole. So that also just nicely considered, neatly done. Another little nice design touch around the pivot area. You can see how there's a little lip on the scale just around the pivot cap, and then the pivot cap itself has a bit of a coned, angled shape to it, or beveled shape, I suppose, around that, and that the same on both sides. Right, what else? I spoke about the liner. So we've got that embedded liner on the inside in stainless steel. And I don't have a torch on my desk. I don't know what I did with it. So I don't know if this is going to pick up, but that has been, maybe if I just get a bit of a reflection like that, that has been milled on the inside. So we've got these round holes, and it's sort of skeletonized actually. So those holes go right through the liner, and that on both sides. See if I can catch it on the inside. Use the hand for reflections. There we go. You can maybe see the little round holes that have been milled in there. And then let's try that again using my hand for reflection. Maybe you can catch it now on the inside. There, I'll need to go find my torch. So that obviously done to make the knife a little bit lighter as well. Speak about that backspacer, so the stainless steel backspacer, a little bit of jimping on, don't really know what that jimping's for, maybe just a little bit of aesthetics, but it doesn't really seem to do anything when you get the knife in hand. And then the glass breaker at the back, and I've mentioned this before in reviews, I don't recommend anybody use a glass breaker on a knife to actually break glass unless you plan on getting your hands cut or some glass in your eye. So only in an extreme emergency, and if you are wearing gloves, and if your eyes are protected, please. So there we go. What haven't I spoken about? Pocket clip. So we've got tip up carry, right hand only. You can see that that has been countersunk into the scale, but looking at that pocket clip, it is the smallest space behind that pocket clip, and it is also extremely tight and difficult to get that over cloth. So first of all, you can only get it over very thin cloth, and then it's really difficult to get it over cloth in general. So this is one of those knives that I tend to, when I have it, I either throw it into a bag or I'll just throw it into the bottom of my pocket and let it just kind of rattle around and lie loose in the bottom of the pocket. And it's not the first time that Kizer have actually done that with a pocket clip. And I've got the other knife here, and it is the mini sheepdog. A bigger pocket clip, but again, maybe a little bit more space on this pocket clip, but also very, very little space behind the pocket clip, but also extremely tight pocket clip. So this is another one. I don't know why they do it. I don't know if anybody at the factory or when they designed or manufactured the knife actually tried this in the pocket, but it really doesn't work very well. So another knife that I just tend to throw in the bottom of my pocket, if I do, when I used to carry this, it just used to lie in the bottom of my pocket. But anyway, there you go. Right, and then just, I spoke about the fact that the pocket clip is right hand only. I just want to go back to this thumb stud platform, whatever that is, thumb disc maybe. That is actually also right hand only. So at first glance, when you look at it, you can see that it's got a little torque screw on it, and you can see that the little indent, the little cutaway that it fits into, goes right through the thickness, the width of the blade. So at first glance, it looks like just loosen that up and you can flip it around to the other side, but you can see that it's actually an asymmetric shape. So that side longer than that side of that triangle. So if you do put it on the other side and flip it around, it fits. You can get it in there when the blade is closed, but then when you try and open the blade, it won't actually allow you to open it because that longer edge now sits this side and prevents you from actually getting the blade open all the way. So quite interesting that they did it like that. It would have been relatively easy to, I think, just modify that a little bit and make it so that it flips to both sides. Interestingly enough, the other options of the knife I'm going to speak about just now, this knife is sold under a different brand as well. And under the Tiger one, that thumb stud actually is a slightly different shape, and it's ambi. That on that version sits on both sides, like I say, on that version of the knife. Right, is there anything that I have left off the knife? I think I've covered off everything, maybe just the action, and you've seen me spidey flick the knife. It spidey flicks absolutely beautifully. This is a fidget toy. Get that closed and you can get your thumb on that thumb stud, and that also, when you do it properly and you're not under the camera, also flicks out beautifully. Always end up being awkward under the camera, but it does thumb flick out beautifully as well. And then as a lefty, you can get your finger in. Let me try this. Don't. I'm probably not going to get this right. No, but it does. You can actually thumb spidey flick it as a there we go. Can you believe it? I spidey flicked as a lefty, but yeah, you might not have the thumb stud on that side, but you can spidey flick it as a lefty, and then you can obviously roll the blade out as well. The action on those ceramic ball bearings, you can see that it flies out, but it's one of those sort of scrapey type actions. It's not buttery smooth. It doesn't affect the opening of the knife, but as I say, it's just when you open and close it, you can feel that almost a little bit of grittiness on it. So not the last word in smoothness. Right, so after that little bit of fumbling and so on, is there anything else that I wanted to speak about on the knife? Not really. Let's get that open and do some size comparisons before I summarize and sum up. In fact, before I do that, let's just speak about the other versions of the knife. So in this, the budget version, the budget Kizer version of the knife, there are two budget versions. So there's this in the G10, and you can see those little, and I want to point this out, those little lines that are on the G10 version. Now you get this in a micarta as well, and it's like a lightish brown micarta and then cream lines in between it. So sort of where you see these lines on the G10, it kind of has the same thing on the micarta, except that those will alternate between the light brown and the cream color. And it actually is very, very attractive. It looks like laminated wood. It is micarta, but it looks kind of like laminated wood. And that is a very, very attractive version. And in that version, it has a satin blade. And the satin blade in this blade shape also really does look good when the light catches that satin blade. Then there's the more expensive version, and that is the frame lock titanium version of the knife. So titanium frame lock, that titanium is in a sandblast finish, and in that case the pocket clip is a milled titanium pocket clip, and that pocket clip actually works better. It has more space behind it, and it is a little more springy. So that's on the more expensive version. And that knife has S35 VN. So not really sure why they made those blade choices, because they both are premium blade steels, the M390 and the S35 VN. But as I say, the expensive version gets the S35 VN, and the in inverted commas cheaper version, well, it is cheaper from a cost perspective, gets M390. Right, so those are the other versions. Now let's do those size comparisons. And I brought in a few smaller knives just because this is such a small package. So the other knife, well, one of the others that I brought in is the Medford knife and tool. So this is the Medford Der Hund. A very, very small knife, but you can kind of see that, gives you a little bit of perspective on that, right? The Der Hund. The other one I brought in, the Bestech Goblin, also a very small knife. Give you a sense then. You can see, in terms of length, the Goblin, which is a small knife, those are pretty much almost identical in terms of length. The Cyberblade, just a more substantial knife, especially in the height kind of dimension. What else? Let's bring that other knife that I used just now. I may as well bring that on as well. The sheepdog, give you a sense of that. So the sheepdog, a little bit of a longer knife, but the same type of knives these. You can see they are small EDCs, but they do have a practical shape, and especially this, I've mentioned it. It does feel like a good user. It does feel a little bit like a utility knife, the Cyber Blade, I mean. So let's get the sheepdog out of the way, and then why not? I brought this in as well. Let's bring something a little ridiculous but fun in as well. This is the Medford Chunky Monkey, and give you a sense of that. So while we're looking at very small and strangely shaped knives, there we go. That's it with the Chunky Monkey. And then I will use, well, before I get into the usual ones, this knife I brought as well. And this is the little bit of dust flying out there. This is the Fox Suru. And this knife always does surprise me. It's one of those knives that when you kind of use it and you have it in your hand, it feels like a bigger knife. It's one of those shapes that feels good in your hand. But when you put it next to the Cyber Blade or other smaller knives, you just realize how small that actually is. And there again, those two knives, the Suru might be a smidgen longer, but they are basically the same size knives. And it is a knife that I really do like so that's the Fox Suru. Right, now, my usual ones, the ones that I've been using, well, this one that I've been using of late, and I think a lot of people will be familiar with that knife. You see that a lot in the wild, and that is the Spyderco PM3. Give you some scale there. So a taller knife, the Cyber Blade, but you can see quite, well, substantially shorter. Right, that's the Spyderco PM3. Let's bring this out. Another Spyderco, an altogether bigger knife, but just to give you some scale there, and that is the Spyderco Manix 2. Right, and then the last one, and I'll bring this, and I can't resist saying it, and I'm going to say it because it is a knife that has been out for so long, and I think most people will be familiar with it, and that is the Benchmade Mini Barrage. Give you some scale there. Right, guys, and I think that now does cover off everything. And eventually, at last, I get to redo the review, about time, and eventually I get to have the Cyber Blade on the channel. But it's a great little knife. It is something a little bit different, and it is a good user. I actually have carried this knife a lot, and it's the kind of knife that I sort of throw into the bottom of my range bag, or just in the bottom of the pocket, or you can just kind of leave this in the car. It's one of those type of knives, a practical, good user, small enough to just about get in anywhere. And that blade shape does lend itself, I'm going to say it again, to good hard use, and for a lot of different uses as well. So I think a really, really good and interesting knife. If you are looking for that one knife that you can just throw into your toolbox or tool bag or something, have a look at this if you haven't already, and give it a try. Nicely made and interesting designed knife. Guys, and I think that's just about it. I've covered off everything. All that's really left for me to say is thanks very much for joining me. I really do appreciate it when you do, and I would equally appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and the bell icon so that you can be notified every time I release a new video, because I really would love you to join me more often. And other than that, you go well, and God bless.